everyone. Welcome to Blind Men and an Elephant. These are your hosts, Niraj and Osho.
This is a podcast where two friends discuss a whole host of ideas that range from across the spectrum, from economics to culture, politics to sport. And we hope to bring our fresh perspective to things that are happening around us.
We live in times where there is an information overload. So this is our attempt to make some sense of the noise.
You can listen to us on all major podcast streaming apps and, of course, on YouTube. You can check out all our links in the description along with this episode.
So without much more deliberation, let's begin today's episode. The Precariat.
Okay.
So Osho, I was listening to a podcast of anthropologist Jason Hickel where he was discussing global inequality and what changes in society we've been seeing as a result of this. What are your thoughts on this? Because we happened to discuss this podcast episode early on.
Yeah, so what has struck both of us is the idea of the precariat that has been discussed. And we heard, in fact, Guy Standing and his lecture on it where he was describing what exactly it is and what the theory behind it and all of that is. So I think that's what we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely. So without much further ado, Osho, you just mentioned the precariat.
Yeah.
What is the precariat and how does it affect us?
So the precariat is a class of people, a group of people who have emerged as a new social strata around us after we have seen the best and the worst of globalization. So back in the day when industrialization happened and we saw large-scale factories and industries come up, especially in the developed world, there were broadly two classes. Those who owned those industries and those who worked at those industries. That was the owning class, the bourgeoisie, as Marx would put it, and the proletariat, those who worked. But now, with globalization, what a lot of people have found is that those who are generally seen as the working class are now not even what you would call the proletariat, but are in fact in a more difficult situation, in a more precarious situation. And that precariousness is why the term precariat comes in, because there is a significant amount of social and economic instability that people in this class experience. And that's something which I think is worth discussing about, especially in 2020.
Okay, so that's interesting. So what you're trying to tell me is that in the past, when the proletariat used to exist, we had a specific class which basically was called the labor class or the proletariat, right? And this class was characterized by working in places like factories, working on land owned by someone else. And what I distinctly remember is they were characterized by having some kind of union power.
Yes.
And unionization, right? And that seemed to be the basis of the proletariat, wherein and of course going back to what Marx used to say about like the workers rising up in revolution against the people in power. This class was defined by their ability to unionize, get together, and then topple the existing power structures.
I'll just stop you here, and I'd want to go two steps before that. See, when this industrial class that we saw coming up in the 1800s and the 1900s, what we saw for the first time was a large number of people who became wage earners. So, I mean, our history books in India would tell us that before the British came in, we were a lot of people who did handicraft work and did our own small businesses and stuff like that, or you'd be employed on your own farmland where you'd work. But then came this whole structure where you went to work from 9 to 6, earned a certain wage, and then you retired at age 60, and then you took back something. That was the whole structure. And within that structure, of course, was the union, because the union gave you, say, a minimum wage. It gave you protection against some horrible things that would happen to you in the factory. It would give you better pensions, working rights, holidays, all of those things. So that is where the discussion around what labor would do and what labor would get in the world was at. And then came globalization. So that's how I see this.
Very interesting. So, if I were to just think of it in today's context, right, immediately, would you then say that people running small businesses or small entrepreneurs, would they also be then part of this precariat? Or is this slightly differently characterized? Like, because you mentioned, right, like back in the day, it was all about getting that salary, getting that fixed amount of income, which you work towards till the end of your life, that you enjoy somewhat of a retirement phase of your life, right? So what you're telling me now is that increasingly there are a number of people who don't have that fixed income, number one. And number two, it also means they do not have security in the long run of jobs, of capital, of politics, of any kind of sort. And what you're, therefore, my corollary here is, does this also include a lot of these new generational entrepreneurs or freelancers that we see all around us? And would that also include people who, say, offer their services as graphic designers but don't often know what their next job is going to look like? What then becomes a part of the precariat in today's world?
Right. So I think that the precariat, much like the working class of yesterday, does not have its own capital. And I think what is equally important to understand, I think, is that it also does not have the access to that kind of capital that we're talking about. So yes, some freelancers and some gig economy workers will definitely be a part of the precariat, but I don't think entrepreneurs would come into that, because there is opportunity for them to create assets for themselves, to tap into large pools of capital that exist in terms of venture capital, investments, the equity market, all of those things. But I think we're again going ahead of ourselves. I think what we're seeing is that, and here's a random thought. Tell me what you think. A lot of the times when people talk about the American dream, what is the American dream? That, or in fact, I would think the dream of any average middle class household, what is it? It is that my children should have a better future and a better standard of living than I did.
Absolutely.
Right? In terms of looking at it as a mobility, as economic mobility, as social mobility. That's what usually your life is geared towards, right?
As well as just a point to add, there would also be the potential to have some kind of leisure.
Of course.
Which I definitely see as a different thing in our generation versus, say, in the 1980s or the 1990s.
Yeah. No, so that's what I'm saying. That kind of future prospects, better future prospects that you would want to look forward to, I think that's where the precariat gets a raw end of the deal, because the precariat often does not know what's in store. And rather, I would say that more and more people today, especially of our generation, 20s, 30s, they just don't know what exactly their future is going to look like. So are you in fact having any kind of social mobility? Are you going to get the kind of rewards that your parents' generation or your grandparents' generation got out of this whole experiment that was globalization, that was liberalization in India, the Gilded Age that we've spoken of, that people have spoken about in India at least, So that's where I'm coming from. So to put it simply, the precariat can range from people who have migrated from villages in India to cities in hopes that they're going to get a better job and end up working as people, as Swiggy delivery people, as Zomato people, as Uber drivers, etc., all the way up to people who have gone to college, who have gotten degrees from reputed or not, or any university, but they have a bachelor's, they have a master's, they have some kind of skills that they can speak about, but they don't know what's out there for them in the job market, firstly, and secondly, also whether or not they're actually going to get any kind of stability. Because if you look at it from say 20-30 years back, or in fact even our parents, when you talk to them about it, they'll always wonder what kind of a salary contract are you are you employed under, right? And
Absolutely.
are you going to get your provident fund, your insurance, your pensions, all of that, or are you just like somebody on a contract?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Yeah, and this brings back so many memories of conversations I may have had with my elders, or so to say. No, absolutely. And I think you raised a very interesting point there, which I want to ask you a little bit more on, which was that these are people who are educated.
Yep.
These are people who have degrees. These are people who may be even highly educated. They
Yeah.
might have bachelor's degrees in, say, science, engineering, or they might even be somewhere master's degree holders, right? And that's an interesting one, because traditionally we're all trained to think that, okay, the downtrodden or the low classes are always people who've, essentially suffered across the spectrum and not had access to any kind of education and so on.
Yeah.
And yes, while we can debate on the quality of education or in, X institution versus Y institution, this is something that I want to actually ponder on a little bit more, is what does that look like in India? Like in India, we do see an increasing number of people belonging to this precariat. And then we're all aware of the disguised unemployment
Yeah.
problem in India,
Yeah.
where traditionally you have people who've done, say, PhDs or masters, and they're applying for jobs which are very clearly below their level of education.
I was just thinking about this. Recently, there's been a lot of discussion around unemployment in India. And one figure that struck me was that 20, 30, 40 lakh people, 2, 4, 5 million people have applied for 200 jobs, 300 jobs. For what? To do what? To be clerks? To be railway engineers? To run railways? To be ticket collectors? These aren't high skilled jobs. These aren't jobs which require you to go through the kind of academic rigor that these applicants have. But look at the drive for some kind of security. Look at the drive for some kind of semblance of calm and peace in your world, which is what the government job today gives you. And to put and to put that in perspective, why is it that that's happening? Why is it that millions of people, literally millions and billions of people, are applying for government jobs in India? Because in a lot of places, these government jobs are probably the last bastions of security that you have. That, let's not go into questions of efficiency, of clean business models of government. None of that. Simple point is that people want, at the end of the day, the guarantee that on the first day of the month, I'm going to get my check. I'm going to keep some aside for my school, my kids' schooling, and have something safely aside if my house breaks down, if my kid gets a heart attack, any of that, right? All of that. All of that does not happen right now.
Absolutely, Osho. And I think you brought up an interesting point of about security, right? Like take what's been happening for the last few months in the world, right? With the COVID crisis. We're increasingly see, and I'm sure you can relate, where we've seen our own friends and family members, etc., going through this sudden loss of a job situation, or people who've just gotten out of MBA colleges, like the most premium institutions across the world, and suddenly they're faced with this uncertainty of finding a job. And then where does that bring them? That brings them to this place of uncertainty as to what is next. What is my career ladder look like? What is it that I'm going to do? And some of these people might have debts, they might have obligations, but suddenly all of that has been thrown out of whack. And increasingly every day I see people who are super qualified applying for like an internship or something. And I'm all for internships, and there's nothing wrong with doing them. But say doing an unpaid internship at 22 is different from doing it at 28 when you
Exactly.
probably have a lot of responsibilities to meet out within your family, within your whatever it is that you need to do. And that's where I see it's a massive worry, and I see that at a large scale in India. I see posts every day on LinkedIn where people who are like, I've been working in this field for 10 years, 12 years, I'm highly qualified, I have all the right qualifications, and you actually see these CVs. They're not lying. It's not a lie at all. And they're applying. They're literally like, I'm desperate for a job, give me any opening. And they're literally DMing people or chasing after people for any kind of jobs they can get.
Yeah.
And this is what it looks like in India. And I'm pretty sure, I appreciate that might be the case across the world as well. And that's really scary.
Yeah. Niraj, what I want to go at from this, and this is something which is, in fact, the last word that you said is what I want to take forward. This is scary.
Mm-hmm.
This is scary. This makes people anxious. I have been very anxious. I'm sure you have been very anxious. This makes people uneasy, and it definitely affects everyone at a daily level in terms of how they can just lead their everyday life. And that's what I want to think about. I want to think more about what is it that anxiety does. Because there are some very simple questions that everybody asks, right? If they don't get a job, if they don't get a good enough job, if they don't get a good enough salary, what is it that you wonder as an individual?
Yeah.
You wonder, am I good enough for this?
Am I worth it? You're absolutely right. That's like the first thing that comes into your mind.
Right? Am I worth it? Is my worth this?
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
And this is what I think is happening a lot more today in 2020. COVID or not.
Yeah.
I think so. Maybe the COVID crisis has sped this up.
I think the COVID crisis in general has just sort of put everything into perspective, as well as it has brought things that were sort of lurking in the background to the forefront. I think that's what's happened across the
Exactly.
world. Absolutely.
Exactly. And I think, tell me something about what you think about this anxiety that happens in people. What we've seen around us, sort of bubbling.
No, absolutely, Osho. I think the first thing, and this goes hand in hand with a bunch of articles I've been reading as well about how it's probably a byproduct of capitalism, wherein what's happened is your worth is now equated to your labor entirely, almost entirely. And somewhere what's happened is, in that relationship, it's almost like, therefore, if your work means your worth, it also means your lack of worth. Work means your lack of worth.
I'm going to stop you here. What do you mean by, in the world of capitalism, this is how it happens? What is it that this structure that you think governs this?
Sure. So in a world where there are essentially free markets, in a world where the profit of enterprises is almost always at the forefront of everything, which then leads to efficiencies or personal efficiencies being at the forefront of every kind of evaluation. By that, what I mean is, you as a person are always judged based on what you're contributing to the bottom line of that company.
Yeah, I mean, a human is a resource.
Exactly. A human is a resource. Absolutely. I couldn't have put it better. Right? Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we've been seeing it all our lives, right? Where you have quarterly or half yearly reviews where, essentially you have KPIs you're measured against. And it's almost like, okay, you did XYZ and now you will get bonus, or you will therefore be retained, or whatever it is.
Or kicked off, yeah.
Yeah, or kicked off. Absolutely. So, and having these systems in place, of course, there are some benefits that come off it, etc. I'm not debating that. But what I'm saying is, over time, this is built in its own thing, that what I was alluding to earlier, which is me not having a job, or me not having the job that I deserve to have, in quotes, which is something that I studied for, or I apprenticed for, or I've prepared for. Now, therefore, to me, it seems like it would lead to a whole host of anxiety, mental health, or depression kind of issues, where effectively you're telling people that, you know what, you're essentially a failure because you've not set out to achieve what you were meant to achieve, again in quotes.
Yeah.
Right? And that's something that really, again, scares me, for lack of a better word, right? What do you think?
I agree with you, because I think that there's been a lot of conversation around mental health, depression, just taking care of yourself.
Which is
And-
great.
and
Yeah.
which, of course, it's important.
Yeah.
And I think that has also come to the fore because of the fact that these anxieties are all around us. And you know what I've been thinking about is that and I want you to give your perspective on this, because you've seen some of the whole startup ecosystem do its thing. Is, on the one hand, this anxiety leads to people doubting themselves and all of that. But on the other hand, we've also seen the development of what is known as hustle culture, right? Where, because everything is so haywire around us, because everything is so chaotic, and because, well, you have to be driven and you have to have goals and you have to sort of get that mobility going for yourself, you have to hustle, you have to
Correct.
not just make ends meet, but you have to push yourself into getting to somewhere, and that's something which maybe brings you to hustling. What do you have to say about hustle?
Yeah, no, absolutely, you're right. And that's where we see people who actually make sense of all that noise, right? They're the people who essentially are, okay, here are all these problems, and let me be entrepreneurial and solve these problems by, as you said, hustling, right? But the important thing to note about hustle culture, and I think that's something that could flow into our next segment of, how would you want to protect yourself against these sort of issues around you, right? Is that the thing with hustle culture, or the thing with entrepreneurship, is it may seem like, a whole host of random things that are happening.
Yeah.
But more often than not, it is people who are taking very systematic, very, calculated steps towards making a better future for themselves or for the world in the sort of results they want to achieve through their hustle, right? Now, what would that mean? Like, for example, right, if someone wants to raise capital as a entrepreneur, it's not like, it might seem like, oh, they're approaching all the VCs in the world, and they went to 5 meetings and they went to 500 meetings. From the outset, it seems like you can just quantify the meetings.
Yeah.
But what goes behind the hustle is also that acute thing of, okay, I want funding and I know the purposes of that.
Okay.
Right? Why do I want that? How do I go about it? They actually put in the time, the research, the understanding, so that when they reach those meetings, when they actually achieve those targets that they set out to meet, they are doing it in a systematic manner where they're targeting the effort and not just the goal.
So, but okay, tell me this. What do I have to be, or what do I have to do to myself for me to be capable of doing this hustle? What I'm thinking and what I'm hearing from you is that I can't be a one-trick pony. I can't go to an engineering college, learn coding, hope that I'm going to get into a Tata, an Infosys, a Mahindra, and sit behind a computer and write like streams of code every day, and then hope that I'm going to be sort of hustling in this world, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think you're right. Like, I think the first thing about this is building a skill base which is varied, right? Like, you want to be able to think of going a little bit back in our discussion where you said humans are now a resource.
Yeah.
So a resource in any kind of thing, you would want a resource which is very malleable. You can use it in different situations. You would want a resource which can be, changed or modified with minimal effort.
Yeah.
So therefore, you also need a human resource that is capable of doing multiple things, which means that now that difference of, oh, if you go in science degree, you can be a great coder, but no one expects you to have great language skills or write emails or be good at communication.
Yeah.
That's not true anymore.
Right.
There are these plethora or this platter of skills, or these soft skills as well as some technical skills that almost everyone today, and even more so tomorrow,
Yeah.
would need to know to sort of succeed in this world where just having one skill will simply not suffice.
Niraj, that sounds like a lot of pressure.
It does. I won't lie. Yes.
That sounds like a lot of pressure. And if I haven't had a job for a year,
Yeah.
probably, if I've seen rejections around me, if I've seen entire factories shut down, entire industries go bust, like we've seen with the hospitality industry, for example, how am I supposed to do this? How am I supposed to be 4 people at once? My question is that fair for you to expect of me? Some people might do it. Some people are geniuses. Some people are really phenomenal in what they do and how they contribute to the world. But everybody can't be that.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely. I mean, you're spot on there, right? Like, I cannot disagree with you. And I think that's where the role of, as traditionally, where you always had a welfare state, or
Yeah.
you always had the public sector, the government coming in. That's where the government needs to play some kind of role. Now, what that role is actually, I would want to ask you about, like, what your thoughts on that are. But my contention here is, yes, if the whole economy or everything is evolving, the concept of a welfare state also evolves.
Right.
And that would mean something that fits well into this scheme of things, rather than traditionally being, we will do something like a Manrega.
Yeah.
Or something else. I'm not saying there's something wrong with that, but that's what I'm saying. So it would evolve to mean something new. And what are your thoughts on what that could mean here?
So I think before we get to that, one little thing that I wanted to talk about as a digression is, what kind of a world do we see as a result of these anxieties that we talk about? Because that world and that contestation of anxieties, this whole chaos of everybody being on the edge, is exactly what's going to drive our politics that will determine this welfare state, right? How our politics are is going to eventually lead to what the government is going to do for us.
Correct.
Right? So my thoughts on this are that we're seeing a very clear polarization in our world today. This polarization has led to 2 groups of people who probably don't listen to each other at all. And both have their own anxieties. What's common between both these groups is that they don't see hope, is that they see that they're nervous and they're uncertain about their future. One group is sort of doing a politics of the past, in the sense that my past was great, give me that back, I want to go back to that time when I was in a much better place. Another one, which is probably looking at the past and saying, hey, I've never had it fine.
Yeah.
So give me something better going forward at least.
Yeah.
And the first one we've talked of, the first one that we talk about is obviously those who have had privileges in the past, who've come from, say, a white background in America or in Britain or in Europe, where they've seen that Europe is just for them, without immigrants, without outsiders, without any of that kind of stuff that they fear. And the other side is a lot of minorities. There's a lot of people who've always been disenfranchised from the system. So then they've seen and they've developed a politics of hope, which started probably with Occupy Wall Street, is now manifesting itself with people like Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, all of these people. So that's what I think. What do you think?
Absolutely, I agree with what you're saying. And to me, it seems very clear, like from what we've seen in the upcoming US election, as well as the Indian election that happened last year, and many other elections across the world, is that increasingly there is a third class of people, which is not the traditionally 2 classes that have always been catered to by political systems, right? Which is either the very rich capitalists who own, own means of production, own power, own land, etc. And on the other hand, the sort of very downtrodden, unionized, maybe the farmers, etc. And there is essentially a very, very large growing populace in the middle, which needs representation, which needs to be heard, if nothing else, humanely, just being spoken to as an equal or as an individual. And I think right now the fear is that this whole section of society doesn't have a voice or doesn't have a representation in anywhere in the political spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. In the sense that politics, because of how it is, can often get toxic. It can often turn people off and just not be positive for people and just sap people or engross them and fill them with negativity very often, regardless of what camp you're in. That can be a very toxic space to be in, which is why somebody who just talks calmly, who says things as they are, and of course promises some kind of hope, is something that you want to look forward.
So Osho, okay, now considering all these factors that we've spoken about, right? What do you think a government in the future, which, say, in a perfect world, cares about the precariat in the way that we imagine, what do you think they should be doing, and what is the direction they should take in the future?
Look, I look at it sort of simply, in the sense that a lot of the times the anxieties and the insecurities that people experience at the individual level come from some very basic needs and wants that they have. The need to never worry about the next meal. The need to have decent healthcare, where if I have something wrong that has happened to my body, somebody is looking after me. In today's time, education for sure, good, decent public schooling. So I think at the very outset, at least a government which promises to take care of all of these things. And I know this sounds sort of vanilla and boring, and okay, everybody is going to ask for better schools and better hospitals. But the thing is that there has been a lot of conversation around different models of healthcare, different models of education. How much does the private sector have to play a part in it, and all of those things? I just think that discussion just doesn't work today. That discussion cannot go on any longer. We've seen umpteen number of people suffer so much because they can't get a bed. We've seen so many kids, especially in India, drop out of schools before they were supposed to. We've seen just so much deprivation because of the fact that their jobs are uncertain, and that's why everything else just doesn't work. So I think that at least reduce the anxieties, at least reduce the insecurities. Maybe I'm sounding too utopian, maybe I'm sounding too, I don't know, I'm sounding like a lefty, but yeah, these things I don't think should be worried about anymore. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think I agree, and I think these form the most basic of human needs, just the ability to have some kind of mental peace. I think is very underrated, and it's a very important need in today's world, right? And yeah, I think that makes absolute sense. This would be a great place to start. I definitely think so.
And I think a lot of people are now also coming around to the idea of a basic income. Just giving a stipend to every single individual. And I think even in India, we've seen different forms of it being tried. Like before the 2019 elections, the Indian government gave every farmer some money. During COVID, they have promised certain classes some money, like widows and people with disabilities and all of those things. They've been given money, just cash, straight in hand. And the government, in fact, even boasts about the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile trinity, where they can directly transfer money into your bank account if you're a poor person. Of course, a lot of people have been discussing a universal basic income, in America, even here. So that's also something which I think is a direction we can think about.
Would you want to give our listeners any kind of key takeaways, like succinct takeaways from this discussion as to what they should be thinking about while they wait for our next episode?
Two things. One, and I've done this for myself. Maybe this is too naive, but I've continuously told myself that things that are going wrong with my world and with my friends' lives, probably it's not their fault, it's not my fault. Very often things can get difficult, and it's important to understand that often things are difficult because of reasons outside yourself. So I think that's important to say very often, even though it sounds like a simple thing. And secondly, I think taking from that is just, I would like to just tell people that you'd want to be more involved in how the world is being run, in just knowing what people are doing, what governments are doing, what companies are doing, what social groups are doing. Just be clued in, be informed, and that's about it.
Awesome. That was great. So, just as a closing thought, do you have any recommendations for our listeners in terms of anything fun that they should watch or read or listen to this coming week?
So I think up until the first week of November, we're going to see some crazy fun in the US elections.
Oh, damn, yes.
At least the US, I mean, Donald J. Trump is going to give some great entertainment up until election night, maybe even after. We don't know what's in his head. Maybe he thinks he's losing already, so he's just taking off his mask and just roaming around the world like he's the boss, because maybe he's just the boss for like a couple of months more. Who knows? I'm not going to be predicting this one because we were all wrong the last time.
Never again.
But that's what I'm going to be entertained by, because living in India, you can only wish that Donald Trump is somebody else's president. so that steady stream of entertainment is there. But yeah, please look after yourself, Donald. What about you?
Awesome. So I'm actually going to link back to something I said earlier in the podcast about skill building, etc. So there's this great book I read called Atomic Habits by James Clear, which I found super fascinating because it goes down into the science and it breaks down the process of habit formation. And I think before you decide, okay, these are the skills I want to build, these are the sort of new things that I need to learn, this gives you an important tool in your arsenal, which is the discipline and the habits that go behind creating these new skills and adding them to your own kitty. So I think it's a must read for everyone who looks to sort of improve themselves.
Awesome. Okay, so that's episode 1 from us. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye and take care.
Ciao.